Good evening, viewers. Good evening, viewers. Welcome to this session on redefining CS education, the computational thinking angle, organized by Team Shaastra. Before we move any further into the session, we proudly present to you UpSkill, an initiative under Shaastra to induce and enhance the computational thinking skills of middle school students by empowering teachers with state-of-the-art techniques in the subject. After a point, the best of us focus on developing our computational thinking skills due to various factors where we encounter computer science in a rather different perspective than we did in school. Upskill is a small step taken towards bridging this gap. Before starting this panel discussion, we would like to show a special message from Mr. Keshav Murugesh, the CEO of WNS Global Services and the ex-chairman of NASCOM.
Hello everyone. It's really wonderful to be interacting with all of you.
Join the call after
and
the
to be
video.
part of this event conducted by IIT Madras. Anything that involves IIT Madras is obviously very prestigious and an aspirational event, and I'm delighted to be here. IIT Madras has produced such great students who have gone on to become great technologists as well as leaders of the business world, and I'm very, very certain that the institution is very proud of every one of them. UpSkill Shaastra 2021 is very appropriate, and the timing is absolutely the right timing, because at this point in time, the future is all about learning and upskilling and staying relevant in a new and digital world. I just want to quote Henry Ford, who had said that anyone who stops learning is old, whether he's 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning is young. So just change the word learning for upskilling, and you have a very relevant quote for today. All of us have faced the pandemic, COVID 2019, and we have seen the way this pandemic has actually completely changed the way we live our lives. So as we come out of this pandemic, I would expect to see that there will be a huge need from clients, first and foremost, to save cost. There will be a big need for clients to accelerate their digital journeys in order to make sure that they are relevant in a new marketplace. There is going to be a huge need for clients to want to work with partners who can take them down the route of completely new models. And finally, companies will want to work with countries and with companies that can actually provide to them the kind of talent that is future-proof from all points of view. If you look at the kind of effort India has been making, I just want to very quickly talk about one of the big initiatives that was driven by the Indian government, the Digital India movement itself. With the announcement of Digital India, as well as so many other allied announcements around it, there is a buzz around digital and technology in this India of today that we have never seen before. I think it is very exciting and augurs extremely well for this country, because it means it has sensitized each and every citizen about the potential of technology, and thereafter the way India can actually continue to lead and take its rightful place in the world of business. We will see far more self-service portals coming to the fore. We will see the need for new technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all coming together and creating an effect and an outcome for clients that have never been seen before. So there are lots of initiatives being driven around DOT norms, around working with the Ministry of Commerce, around labor laws, and overall just enabling a new model for India to do business leveraging technology. What does this mean for us? It means that with digital scaling to a level that we have never seen before, it means that every one of us who are already part of the workforce have to keep upskilling our knowledge and adding new skills and new thinking such that we can stay relevant in a digital world of the future. At the same time, curriculum, course content must change so that a much more practical and practitioner's view is taught to students so that as they come out of the universities, they can actually be very easily welcomed into companies who are managing the new thinking for clients of the future. What is happening around this? If you look at what NASSCOM has done, NASSCOM itself has created a future skills initiative which is focused on overall upskilling and creating new skills and new initiatives of learning for up to 4 million of the current tech workers. At the same time, the government of India has also launched very interesting programs to enable this, and therefore UpSkill Shaastra is a very, very powerful initiative, and I'm certain that the discussion that is going to take place today, the panel discussion that is, will bring out lots of new nuances and create a lot of excitement which will enable India as well as every student to be ready for the future. I would like to thank UpSkill. I would like to thank the IIT. I would also like to wish UpSkill Shastra 2021 the very best. And I do look forward to interacting in person with all of you very soon. Thank you very much.
We thank Mr. Keshav for that insight. Now we'll be starting the panel discussion. I'm Chetan, a student of IIT Madras, and I'll be moderating this panel discussion. I would like to take this moment to thank our panel of eminent personalities for giving us their valuable time despite their busy schedules. I'm honored to invite the first panelist for today, Dr. Madhavan Mukund, the Deputy Director and Dean of Studies and a Professor of Computer Science at the Chennai Mathematical Institute. He completed his BTech in Computer Science in IIT Bombay and obtained his PhD degree in Computer Science in Aarhus University. He has served as the president of the Indian Association for Research in Computing Science, IARCS, from 2011 to 2017, and president of the Association for Computing Machinery Indian Council from 2016 to 2018. He was also elected Fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences in 2018. He is also passionate about computer science education and is playing an active role in ACM India's CS Pathshala initiative, which aims at introducing computational thinking skills in schools. Thank you for being a part of the panel today, sir.
Hi, glad to be here.
Next, coming all the way from Seattle, USA is Mr. Kevin Wang, the co-founder and former head of Microsoft Tails. Kevin holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from UC Berkeley, and a graduate degree in Education from Harvard. TEALS, or the Technology, Education and Literacy in Schools program, has partnered with over 1,000 US and Canadian high schools to help them build and grow successful, sustainable, and diverse CS programs. And in the process, have changed the lives of 75,000 plus high school students. Thank you for joining us in this discussion today, sir.
Great to be here.
Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Ashwani Sharma. He is the member of the Google Research India founding team and heads operations to the research lab. He has worked in Google research for more than 8 years, leading university collaborations, computer science education, and other broad educational activities across various countries around the globe. His career spans 18 plus years in roles like software engineering, technical evangelism, university collaborations, education technology, and research program management. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, panelists. Without further ado, let's get into the discussion we have been waiting for. There's an interesting fact which says that the first computer program was written in 1842, but the first computer was built only in 1943, about 100 years later. This shows that computer science and computers are not synonymous. The word computer science is more profound. Starting with Dr. Madhavan, could you tell us your views on how computer science is not just a mere study of computers?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that probably the terminology itself is misleading, because I think we should not probably call it computer science, but computing science, because it's really computing, which is the activity, and a computer is a physical object. As many people have said, it's like saying washing machine science or car science or something like that. You know, it's not study of computers. Unfortunately, a lot of people mistake it for that. So computing science deals with computation, and computation deals with efficiently and systematically solving problems across a wide domain of applications. So it's not related to only building computers, but as we see now in every domain of life. And I think as these things become more and more a part of our daily lives and our different professions, I think some awareness and some ability to do this is inevitably required from everyone. You cannot make decisions as a manager if you don't know what computation can and cannot. You cannot make unreasonable demands, nor can you ignore what can be done automatically. So I think more and more computing is becoming a fabric, part of the fabric of what everybody needs to know in order to perform whatever they're doing. It doesn't have to be anything to do with computing itself, but it's just part of your daily life.
Mr. Kevin, since USA is one of the advanced countries in the field of technology, can you elaborate on the perception of the term computer science among the students over there?
I think, you know, the reason we teach computer science has, you know, a lot of different layers to it. And, you know, for me, there's really three major pillars on why we teach computer science. One, like Madhavan's already said, you know, for any student who are digital native, all kids in K-12 today are digital natives. They really need to understand how the big ideas in computer science work, right? Everything that they use, touch, interact with, or directly or indirectly have some big ideas of computer science behind it that makes it all work. And students shouldn't treat it like Harry Potter and it's magic, right? Magic makes it work. They need to understand the big ideas in computer science, how it works. And whatever our students end up doing in the future, whatever industries they go into, whether it's sports management, business, medicine, law, whatever you think they're going to end up in, having a degree of computational thinking will be not just a nice to have today or 10 years ago, but it will be a requirement for them to be successful at their job. So that's, I think, the second tier. And third, I think for the tech industry itself, we definitely will need more computer scientists and software engineers, and colleges will always need more computer science professors. And so that's the other one, is to make sure that, kids see computer science as a field that they can pursue later on. So I think those are the major three pillars that why we think it's so important to have computer science that's accessible to every student, regardless of where they live, and make sure it's accessible to all the students and that it's offered.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, sir, what was your first impression of the word computer science, and how did your understanding develop through the years?
So I had actually a pretty privileged childhood, because my father used to work at the University Computer Center in Delhi. And therefore, at least I had seen computers from the early 80s. And at a time when actually the personal computer was considered a novelty, because the main computers were actually Unix terminals in the University Computer Center. So at least I had exposure to what it was as a device. But how it works and what are its foundations, they only started to happen for me somewhat later in my middle school. And that was because, again, I think I consider myself very privileged to be able to go to a school which was teaching programming from class 6 in the late 80s. And so learning GW Basic and being able to set up programs and be able to build little things was quite a bit of pleasure. And that's how I got hooked to the field. But until actually I got to college and did my bachelor's in computer science, I did not know what are the foundations really, what is computability, what is the concept of computation. There are actually things that cannot be computed. And so there is a progression in exposure. And the way you framed your question, I think I was at the stage of what is a computer and more of a technology, a person using technology in the early parts. I became a little bit of a creator of technology when I started to learn programming in school. But a more deep understanding only happened once I studied it formally in college. And that actually indicates how people may proceed towards gaining more and more familiarity with the subject. And if somebody is not particularly looking for a career in building new technology, then they may not go to the depth that I learned in college. But a basic understanding becomes very, very useful, just as Kevin said, in all forms of professional fields today. People are dealing with data, people are dealing with visualizations, they are dealing with technology, the latest being AI on the block. And all of those have foundations in computing and computer science.
Mr. Kevin, when you were answering the first question, you mentioned the term computational thinking. It is one of those new 21st century buzzwords that has gained a lot of attention over the past few years. But there's a lot of gray area in its understanding. So, what, according to you, is computational thinking all about, and why is it often considered as an indispensable skill, not just in computer science, but any other field?
I think, the big, what we think of computer science, computers will change, right? It used to be Charles Babbage's machine that Ada Lovelace sort of programmed, and that doesn't look anything like what we went to the moon with, or, what Alan Turing used to break the Enigma code, or what Heidi Lamar used, for frequency hopping, any of that stuff, right? They can be in such different shapes and applications, but the big ideas in computer science are still very, very similar. A loop is still a loop, right? Repeating, and you're going to repeat something until a condition becomes true or untrue, depending on what language you're using when you're writing. But so these big ideas that drive computer science, I think, are what's really behind computational thinking. So like what you're applying could be different, but the big ideas in an more abstract computer science way, as you can think of it, is going to be the same. So think of like pseudocode, right? Pseudocode doesn't matter which language or how high level or low level language, that pseudocode is going to be the same. And I think, teaching students that type of thinking, that type of computational thinking, is what's going to be important, I think, especially in the K-12 level. I think it's up to the colleges to teach them more in upper division computer science and how operating systems work and database, like behind the scenes, under the hood kind of look. But those are the kind of like the basic tools that we want to teach K-12 students of how to think and how to use these tools that they're going to be using, even if they don't pursue computer science as a career.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Madhavan, what are your thoughts on the interdisciplinarity of CS? How do you justify that computational thinking skills are relevant to other domains and not just CS careers?
So I think this has been, what Kevin has said and what I mentioned, and also I think it's obviously the case that whatever we do nowadays is affected, and also Ashwini mentioned about data and quantified decision making. So this is happening across the board, but it's also happening in domains very unfamiliar to us, like in music and all that, where a lot of electronic synthesis of music has come in. So some familiarity with computation is part of almost any discipline. But more than anything else, I think if you look at more traditional businesses, right? So people have always relied on some kind of fact finding in order to assess whether they're doing well or not, to make plans and so on. And a lot of this is now being deluged by a large volume of data, which makes it very difficult to do anything manually anymore. And so from that perspective, almost any business proposition or any decision, whether it's business or administrative, or even right now, for example, policy making in the presence of a pandemic, I think cannot be done just by making intuitive guesses. You have to look at information and process it. So from that perspective, if you don't have an idea about how to process information, or also what can and cannot be done. See, one part is computability, as Ashwani said, that some things cannot be computed at all, but some things are expensive to compute because they require a lot of resources. So if you don't have an idea whether something can be done in a few minutes or in a few days or in a few hours, then you don't have a really good idea about which approach to take. So from that perspective, I think it is definitely interdisciplinary, in the same way that mathematics is. You don't need to have a deep understanding of, say, for example, Riemannian geometry in order to use mathematics in your day-to-day life. So there will always be deep ideas in computing which will be pushed through by people who are specialized in it. But at a ground level, I think it's becoming as basic a skill as just quantitative math skills that we teach in school.
I'd like to comment a little on that. I think the fundamental basis of computational thinking or computing as a concept is the idea of an algorithm. And in many situations of problem solving, or in professional careers, or in our day-to-day lives, we are always trying to find how do you break down problems into smaller chunks, and what is an efficient way to apply our mind to find a solution. And so the concept of algorithm helps us everywhere. And these algorithms, you can start to extend that problem solving gets assisted by data. And then when data comes into the picture, then you need more formal methods of being able to analyze it. And you kind of build on those concepts. I would say also make a comment on the interdisciplinary part, that everything being broken down into concept of logic and algorithms is also not maybe not the right thing to do. There are situations where algorithmic solutions aren't always what is the right or the socially most relevant answer. And sometimes they actually can mislead you also. So a combination of algorithmic and computational thinking coupled with situations where there is no right answer, there is no efficient solution. Maybe you're not even trying to find an efficient solution, but you're trying to find something that works for society. And bringing those things together is actually very, very important. And Madhavan pointed out decision making in a pandemic is like one such example where there are just so many different factors and there's never enough data, and you have to look at society as a whole and make the right decision. It's a very, very tough thing that policymakers today are dealing with, and this is where computational and algorithmic thinking and a bit of what I would call as very socially sensitive critical thinking are actually coming together.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
basically,
and I very much agree.
Yes, sir. You can add.
I very much agree with that. Yeah, I think there's, I think fundamentally computer science and computational thinking is about using a set of tools for problem solving, which every student will need, and that those set of tools have evolved as computer science and what we can do with it has evolved. But the ideas of abstraction and divide and conquer, applying that to a lot of multidisciplinary things that the students will need, whether it's in bio or in biology, or if they want to learn about how Alice can talk to Bob securely using encryption, all of these things that matters in their day-to-day lives fundamentally have all of these things that we're talking about. And then I think Ashwani brings up a good point in terms of there's a certain part of practical literacy, right? You want to know how your credit card numbers can go from your computer to Amazon securely and coming back. There's that sort of literacy. And then there's also the learnings. You go a little bit deeper, then there's that algorithm thinking of how Alice and Bob can do that over and over again securely, and what that algorithm is like. And you could go very, very deep, or you can go very, very high. But how those two are linked, and I think our students need both, and just depends on how deep you want to go into it. And obviously, certain sections you need to wait till college, but there are certain things that they need to be literate about and have some general ideas about, in K-12.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. In fact, there's a lot of misconception that computational thinking is limited to CS. So you have clarified it that it's applicable to any field. It's not limited just to computer science careers. So all three of you have been harbingers of change with regards to computer science education in your respective domains. How laborious is it to establish a vision for change and implement it in a system? Who generally people don't even see it as a huge scope for improvement and is comfortable with the status quo. How can we change the status quo? Mr. Ashwani, perhaps you can go ahead first.
I think you stand on the shoulders of giants. There are people who think about what is needed for the future. What are the shortcomings? People publish, people do research, people think about these things in a very, very profound manner. And we try to take a bit of that and try to see what are the little ways in which those things could be introduced in the education area. So the idea of being more familiar with technology or more familiar with computational thinking have been on for more than 2 decades now as a requirement for school education. And different countries have been able to implement it at many different levels. When we were looking at in Google India on how we could proceed in this direction, we understood that uh, making curriculum changes and making all of these things happen in a more formal manner is going to take a lot of time because apart from systems being slow, I think the systems are slow for a reason. Things should not change just because there is some trend. People have to analyze it and discuss it in this manner because if you introduce something at class 5 today, that thing is going to stay on for many, many years. And the effect of that actually in a person's professional life is only going to show up at least 10 years down the line after the person finishes school, college, and goes into a profession. So it's fine to be deliberate, but we can also always think about how to introduce things in a easy to consume manner, which does not disturb the formal system, but starts to make a argument that maybe more formal methods are required. So we introduced a contest, and it's still running. It's called Code to Learn, and we just introduced MIT's Scratch and App Inventor tools as ways for students to explore programming in fun, new ways. And because it's a contest, it's optional to participate, but we are very happy to see the response. And it's been running now for more than 6 years. And more and more schools and teachers therefore get familiar with this. So that's been a good experience. And when we carry on working with more formal methods of building teacher communities or figuring out what needs to be done in curriculum along with that. And those decisions are still, for the most part, not formalized yet.
Mr. Madhavan, perhaps you can add to that. You have played an active role in ACM India's CS Pathshala initiative. So, what were the challenges faced when implementing it on a large scale?
So exactly as Ashwini said, I think the thing is that systemic change requires time. I think as a whole, everything is changing in a faster and faster way. We are accelerating in time. If you think about math and science as a kind of core of education, I don't think it was ever the case. Perhaps you can trace it back to industrial revolution, but I would still think it's more like a 20th century phenomenon that we have come to believe that everybody in school must study maths and science up to a certain level, or they are considered to be foundationally illiterate. So I think it's a very recent phenomenon that, and now with computing emerging as a force, and it's impact expanding so fast. I think it's hard to react properly to it. As Ashwini said, you have to take a balanced view. So I think it's not unfair of system builders, educational system builders, to be cautious. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that if you want to put in something about computational thinking, you have to take something out, right? Because the thing is, the school curriculum is already heavily overloaded, and you can't just keep on adding machinery, adding material to the students to study without giving them a chance to give up something. So somebody has to be willing to give up something. So CS Pathshala has taken a kind of, as in a way, like what Ashwini said, a kind of oblique route, which is that many schools have some time available for broadly, IT or some kind of familiarity with computing in terms of teaching word processors or any such thing. And so you can always use some of that time to teach computing in a more serious way, so computational thinking, and hopefully through a sensitization process get teachers and therefore administrators and curriculum designers to agree that some of this material should be integrated. But then you have to again work with the curriculum designers to see what to leave out. So it's a slow process to make it official, but I think that CS Pathshala has had a good success in this, of designing kind of small modules which can be taught without too much of dependence on other things. So you can pick and choose individual concepts and teach them. And these can also be taught by existing math teachers with minimal training. So it doesn't require a very big trained workforce to implement it. And through this, we are hoping that we have had some success in influencing curriculum already. And we're hoping that in the years to come, there will be an appreciation that these things need to be done. But I think all these changes have to be thought out well. I don't think, as Ashwini said, we cannot rush into making a change and then change it back. And also the impact will be felt for many years. So we should not be very hasty about making these changes, but I think the changes will come and people will realize, I think, that this has to come and then something will have to give. So that's the only.
I'd like to mention that everything that CS Pathshala develops is free for anybody to access. So if there are parents or school teachers who are interested in seeing these resources, they can go to the CS Pathshala website and download all the resources for free.
It's really
absolutely. Thank you, Ashwani. Yeah.
Kevin, we would like you to add some light to this with respect to your initiative Teams, which was solely founded by you.
Yeah. So it was really great in sort of the, before this panel, the four of us kind of met together and had a really great far-ranging sort of get to know each other sort of meeting online. It was really great. And I think, from that we discovered, I think fundamentally, no matter what country you're in, for CS education at K to 12 level, you're answering really three questions, right? One is what to teach. Right? What to teach, how much, when, and just sort of like the core material that you want to teach the students that needs to be answered. A lot of that comes from the university level or the K to 12 educators, or sometimes from policy, sometimes from industry, and need to decide as a whole, as a country, of sort of what to teach, what kind of computer science you're going to teach. The second is how to teach that, right? What kind of tools you're going to use, the pedagogy you're going to employ, it could be as, what kind of languages you want to teach, and, what kind of online tools perhaps, and, all of these, which kind of mechanisms and what kind of pedagogy you want to use to teach those, what you decided of, in terms of the what. How do you teach it? Do we do more labs, more projects? What kind of interaction do you want to have with data, for example? So, how to teach that. And then lastly, and I think the most important to actually get computer science into classrooms across the world, is who will be doing the teaching, right? And the teachers, how are you going to train teachers and train enough teachers to teach what you decided on, what to teach and how to teach? They're going to be the ones in front of the students every day for 9-10 months out of the year, doing the actual teaching from 7 to 4 o'clock, right, in the classroom. And I think that's actually, at the end of the day, that's the hardest problem to solve. TEALS itself, we said, hey, there's a lot of in-service teachers that are already in the classroom that have taught some other subject that want to teach computer science. Then we have software engineers early in the morning before they go to work and teach a class of high school computer science together. That's one model of TEALS doing it. There's other ways of doing teacher professional development. How do you train the teachers? And there's online methods as well. So that is fundamentally going to be the big question. How do you work with schools of education, teacher training programs, to make sure that teachers that will be graduating from those programs have the ability to teach computer science, right? So I think those things are going to be fun. Those are the three fundamental questions. And the last one of, who will be teaching and how do we train them, will be the one that will answer the scale question. And it might have been, I want to go back to a thing that he mentioned about, I think, what do you need to take out of the curriculum, right? I think people have been posing, if we want to put computer science in, it's a zero-sum game. I don't think it is a zero-sum game. And I think as sort of society evolves, the educational needs of our students will evolve as well. So things like, teaching handwriting, all the kids, use their thumbs now, right? Like, using handwriting and some of those things, or typing, typing classes or whatever. Some of will, just sort of as society evolves, it will sort of eventually go away, and computer science can take place of certain classes. I think it's a more of a natural evolution. And I think as educators and policymakers and folks in the industry see that, I think it'll slowly evolve rather than a zero-sum game.
That was interesting. So, panelists, what do you think is the right age to start CS education? Is it primary, from a primary education level, or middle school level, or high school level? What do you feel? Kevin, perhaps you can just tell us from team's perspective.
I think, I think it's the question of what and how, right? I think that's a what and how. I think in K through 5, K through 6 in elementary school, you want to have computer science integrated into other subjects, right? Kids have manipulatives and things, little toys that teach them how to navigate a little robot around with physical blocks and things like that, or Lego robotics. I think those are really great for grade school. And then in middle school, a lot of schools have started to do, 1/4 of a specific computer science course, while most of it goes into other sciences and sort of kind of go integrated with other classes. But a lot of middle schools are starting to have a 1 semester or 1/4 long computer science, more specific computer science class. And I think that's probably where, in a student's progression, middle school is when you start to introduce computer science as sort of its own discipline and how it applies to everything else. And in high school, having a pathway for students to take, 1, 2, 3 computer science classes, culminating in an AP computer science class. That's equivalent to a CS1 class in college. That's a year-long class that counts for college admissions or credit. I think is the right way to go. So it goes from grade school, they don't even know it's computer science. They think they're playing with robots. To in middle school, they get introduced to the idea that, hey, this is a sort of a science in itself. And then in high school, a clear progression to learn it, and then possibly also pursue it later on in college.
Mr. Ashwini, what do you feel is the right age to start computer science education?
I think it comes down to also what's the availability of infrastructure, what is the capacity of the system to deal with it. Those questions actually become very, very important. And I think a basic introduction to technology at primary school level is generally happening. Whether formally a school does it or not, children are exposed to phones from their parents. And so if some kind of an element of discovery is introduced, so that they play around with some app which lets them drag and drop and place some things, and that creates maybe an animation or a story or things like that, which actually Scratch does, and in a more accessible manner, so that it's possible to do it on phones instead of looking for a computer lab or a desktop computer. So I think the introduction of concepts of loopings and branching and instructions and flow comes naturally with these sort of activities, and they can be introduced at primary school. But I agree with Kevin, and this is something that the initiatives from Google, both our contest and our teacher workshop and activities, they all agree with that we should have it at more of a middle school level, where a more formal concept of that this is programming and this is looping and this is branching and all these other concepts get introduced. I think in India, anyway, the pressure of board exams is just so high that classes 9 to 12, it becomes difficult to introduce new things. And even if they are there, we don't find them being given much attention. So it's hard to keep the intensity going in those classes. But we know that a lot of students prefer computer science as their college degree if they prefer to choose engineering or science. So then actually the foundations, as they were intended for people who are looking for career as creators of technology, they can be introduced at college time. But I think play around during primary schools and be a bit more formal in middle school seems the right time.
Mr. Madhavan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so broadly along similar lines, but let me just maybe say something specifically that so CS Pashala currently starts at very early school. There is a trade-off between, when children are old enough to follow material and follow instructions, but usually from grade 2 or 3, class 2 or 3, I think they are in a position where they can be guided. And so I think the early part is to understand, things that we have talked about as computational thinking, systematic problem solving, breaking down, recognizing patterns. This thing is the same as something else. I can do the same thing here that I did there, even though it's a different situation. So these kinds of things can be introduced very easily through activities which the students perform, and therefore they kind of enjoy, because it's not abstract, reading something and memorizing. At the same time, it's also something which they can then learn to incorporate. So I think that has been quite successful at the early stages. So I think it's quite easy to adapt many of the ideas that we want to introduce to kids to the younger stages. Now, when we get into technology, as Ashwini said, there is a problem with resources. I mean, schools have to, and students who are coming from less privileged backgrounds need to have access to computational devices. And although devices are becoming more affordable, it's still a challenge to make sure that everybody has access to these. So when we teach programming, that is something which really has to be kept in mind, that are all students equally enabled. And another thing which I think is a little bit possibly related to this, but it's not really something which has come up right now, is that, see, because when we talk about computing as an interdisciplinary thing, I think programming is also that way. See, when I also do the computing Olympiad, and that is really algorithmic programming and, computational, whatever, the, competitive programming, which has a very direct goal. You have a problem, solve it in the most efficient way possible. And that is something that you can have a right or wrong answer. So it's a bit like taking a mathematics problem and saying, can you give me a solution for it? But I think we are seeing that, computing and creating technology for use is much more than just solving a problem. Right? There are many aspects, including how usable it is and how well designed it is and all that. So there is a creative aspect. So in a way, computing and programming is also moving into a direction where it becomes a more creative field, and therefore assessment is also a little bit more challenging. So it comes back to Kevin's point about training teachers and curriculum designers and assessment procedures. So if we are not just going to tell whether somebody can compute factorial, but make something which does this, collects information from a user and makes it does something useful and gives back something, then you have to also assess whether that thing is doing it in a useful way or whether it's not useful. So I think there are many aspects which are coming in as we make more ambitious, I would say, more ambitious demands of what we want to teach as a part of computing.
Yeah. Okay. You could relate. I think you can relate to this. It's often observed in India that students don't show much interest towards computer science, despite the best efforts. But there's a sudden surge in the demand for computer science seats when it comes to engineering. Mr. Ashwani, perhaps in fact, you mentioned about it in the previous answer. So, what is your opinion about this gap in the computer science education in school and computer science education in college?
I do not fault the students for not showing interest. I think the pressure of securing a college admission is so high that they have to optimize their timing and their time commitment to in classes 9 to 12 for basically securing that. So that's how it works, and some students do study it out of personal interest, or they take it as one of the additional subjects. But yeah, I do not fault them for not being, very, very enthusiastic about it at that stage. I think, though, that for a specialization in the field, college is the right time for specializing in something. So, and this is true, I think I would like to argue that this is true across all disciplines, because school is a time for overall broad foundational knowledge and understanding, and college is the time when you can kind of go deeper into those and specialize into the field that you want. So what the sort of foundations that we're thinking of right now, for middle school or even sometimes for primary school, with availability of infrastructure, with availability of teachers who would like to teach it. I think we would be in a right place to have those basic foundations in a broad student population in India, even if we teach it up to 8th class. 6 to 8 is enough. And the rest is, I don't think the entrance exam and the board exam system is going away soon. So we let it be the way it is until more deeper policy decisions are made to do something about it. And then students picking it up again when they get to college and they actually want to specialize and have a career in it. I think that is absolutely fine at the moment. I think the foundation being in middle school is the right way.
Thank you for that, sir. Well, CS is a very high-paying industry where most graduates choose to work in the field rather than teaching. So, what do you think can be done to incentivize more graduates to join the education sector in order to give back and improve the system that made them? Kevin, perhaps you can tell, because TEALS was primarily about recruiting people from the industry and asking them to teach. So, how do we incentivize?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the who will be teaching and how do we train them. I think sort of the where who's going to be seen standing in front of the students. So you have fundamentally you have two options, right? You can ask engineers to go teach, or you can go ask teachers to go teach computer science, right? Those, because we're in the classroom, we're teaching this subject. Those are really our two options. Whether it's supplemented by online materials and whatever other tools that are out there. And so you talked about computer science. In the U.S. is the highest earning bachelor's degree you can get. Computer science beat out petroleum engineering, which is oil, a few years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, right? And so, I think it is, I think that's going to be really, really a hard choice for engineers to make. In the U.S., college costs quite a bit of money. So if you go to a institution and you spend, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of $1,000s on your education, and in computer science, you say, well, I have this debt. Do I become a teacher? Do I become a software engineer? That's a really hard personal choice for anyone to make. I know for one, in my graduating class, I was the only one to make the teaching decision, right? And so that's a really, really hard question. That's a pipeline. That's a teacher pipeline issue that I think on the policy level, on a societal level, that we have to solve. And on the teacher side, before we go that, for engineers, you can think about student loan forgiveness, other incentives to help them make that decision to go into teaching a little bit easier. For teachers, there's two groups of teachers. There's teachers who are in the classroom today. They might have been math teachers, science teachers, art teachers. How do we help them learn computer science so they can teach computer science? And that's where TEALS comes in, right? We have software engineers who don't have to be at work until 10, 11, fairly flexible hours. And we train them to teach computer science with those teachers. But our end goal wasn't to have these engineers teach computer science at those schools forever, right? They can only teach one period early in the mornings. The goal is to teach the teachers while we teach the students, so the teachers eventually teach on their own. And then they can teach, the whole day without us being there. So that fundamentally becomes teacher professional development. How do we do that for teachers that are already in the classroom, as well as new teachers, to work with college teacher programs to help them get enough computer science, so those new teachers that are going to be coming in have enough computer science to teach. And Ashwani talked, earlier, talking about, computer science, why the perceived gap between college and K-12. I think it's mostly availability of courses. and teachers and tools, all of that stuff. And also, we know exposure leads to interest, right? If you look at sports, football and baseball are popular in the US, cricket is popular in India. It's really all about exposure, right? If we have more channels here that show cricket or T20 cricket here in the US, it may get more popular. Or if NFL has a big TV deal in India, that might become more popular, right? The sports leagues all realize that. And computer science has gone under a transformation over the last, I would say, decade and a half with code.org, movies and TV shows, making computer science more mainstream, and students can think, I can become a computer scientist. It's not as far-fetched as it once was, portrayed in the media. So I think having that exposure early on, media in sort of what the students see and feel every day outside of computer science, as well as the availability of courses, will do that. All the surveys show parents and students are interested in computer science, and it doesn't translate into full course signups because those classes don't exist, so they can't sign up. And exposure, we know that if a student takes computer science in high school, AP computer science high school, they're, depending on the population, they're 3 to 9 times more likely to major in computer science. So those all have direct effects, so they're not completely separate from each other.
Regarding the gap, which we talked about earlier, there's a common misconception that computer science is a very complicated subject, and it generally isn't implemented in schools at an earlier age because of this reason. Students generally find it intimidating as soon as they see a program. In fact, computer science is not a compulsory subject in most of the Indian schools. So, Madhavan sir, what is your take on this? How do we make children like the subject in a fun way rather than being intimidated by it?
Yeah, so I think, as I said earlier, I mean, many of these organizations like code.org and CS Unplugged, and some of this material which is now widely shared, freely available, and which has also been incorporated into CS Pathshala and other curricula. So I think by making it activity based and letting people demystify, I think that's the easiest way. But I also think that computer science, unfortunately, even at an advanced level, as a computer scientist, an academic computer scientist, I think that we have not done our job. So if you look at subjects like physics, maths, there are popular articles, magazines, books, which try to demystify the subject and try to get people interested. Biology is currently a big hot topic. Everybody is writing. A lot of very, eloquent people who are specialists in medicine and biology are writing things which bring the subject out in a way that it should be understood. And I think I cannot think of a single book on computing that I would recommend to anybody to read. And I think this is a real tragedy. So I think we really need to popularize it. As Kevin said, I think exposure is key. Unless people can see that this thing is accessible, they are not going to find it accessible. And also, we don't have enough, I think, pedagogically material designed to teach. The teaching programming, I think, is still a very controversial thing. I think no two people agree on how it should be taught. And I think a lot of that comes through in this confusion and this mystification. So the teachers, I think, don't have good material to teach from. And the people who write the textbooks which are being used are not necessarily writing them in the clearest way for a new starting student. So I think a lot of it has to do with communication. I think we have to communicate better, I think, what we're doing.
I think I'll also add that this goes to the point of long-term change. Kevin pointed out that you could work with people who are currently professionals, engineers in the field, and plug the teaching gap. But more profound part has to be put into how teachers have to be prepared for teaching this particular subject. And so you do work with in-service teachers currently, but it would really go all the way back to teacher training. And so pre-service teachers and how this concept is introduced and how it becomes part of the official teacher training curriculum, so that and so both research has to be done on this, and some amount of academic and rigor has to be spent to figure out what are the right ways to introduce these concepts and make them formalized as part of the teacher training curriculum. At least we have kind of a lot of momentum behind this. Technology is everywhere. It is affecting us in many ways, and so governments and policymakers are realizing that there needs to be more familiarity, and we can therefore build on that momentum and uh, therefore get some of these more formal methods into place to institutionalize it.
I think, yeah, I think there's a couple good, this is just a parallel. I think perception of CS is hard. I think is I'm not sure if that's the right perception, even though it does exist. If you just look at parallels in music, right? If someone just hands you a sheet music for piano, you wouldn't recognize anything on there, right? It's just a ton of symbols, and you have no idea what that is. And I don't know if you can get a general music a textbook to help you explain that. But if you look at the fundamentals, right? Music has a very low bar to entry. You hear on the radio all the time. You can sing. Your parents, grandparents sing. Folk songs. There's traditional folk songs, but that's all been a part of it. Computer science is the same, right? It's all around us. And schools have had music for hundreds of years, right? They're good teachers, they're role models, they're fantastic teachers. Even though there's very little textbook, you have great music teachers who can teach you music no matter what instruments you play, and you can even at the high school level or have really fantastic students playing music. And I think computer science is very similar to that, right? Very low bar to entry early on, but there's a really high ceiling should you choose to pursue in terms of complexity and ability to master all the nuances in it. And the reason that, and the key point there is the quality of teachers. So if you invest in teachers, then you're going to have amazing students, whatever field that is. And I think it's also unfair for us to be compared to physics and math. That has thousands of years of history. We're computer science, a lot of places weren't even a department or, didn't come out of the math department until 30, 40 years ago. So had computer science had 2,000 years of history, we would have a very different discussion. But, looking at other fields of education, I think we can see a lot of great examples where we can be successful and we can take cues from those areas.
So it's pretty evident we need a lot of paradigm shifts to debunk all those misconceptions and bridge the gap. Okay, adding on to my initial question, what are the incentives for teachers to upskill themselves when instead they can spend that time in earning money? This will perhaps help. Our initiative is primarily about upskilling teachers. So why do you think they should upskill themselves instead of spending that time earning money? Madhavan, sir, perhaps you can go.
So first of all, I think that I firmly believe that somebody who's really passionate about teaching cannot be concerned too much about the differential of what they're earning, because even as an academic, forget about as a school teacher, any person who chooses to be an academic automatically foregoes a large amount, especially in a field like computing, that they could earn. So it's a question of satisfaction of doing what you want and doing things the way you want it. So that has to come through. And upskilling has to be pitched in that sense that that you can do a better job and you can motivate students, and it has to be a self actualization. They have to want to do it. It can't be as a pitched as a carrot that will get them something better. So I really don't have a good answer for that, but I don't think that that's the right approach. I think that one has to convince them that it's for their own good and that society is moving in a certain direction, and that they need to be both themselves current with it and also be able to equip the students that they deal with. And many of the, I have dealt with teachers from schools in the context of teaching programming and all that. And it's not that they're uninterested. I think they are just overwhelmed with the amount of other work that they have to do. So I think if you kind of sit with them and find a way for them to assimilate all this stuff alongside what they're doing, I think they are very enthusiastic to do it. So I think by and large, the teachers I've seen are very enthusiastic. It's just a question of giving them a pathway which they can manage alongside their other responsibilities. So I think that's really the key. So I don't think one has to think in terms of monetary or other incentives or disincentives, rather that one should make it worth their while, I think.
Yeah, I think the
Which
difference
maybe,
we started with a contest, and contest did not require any involvement. Like parents could register their children, and actually it's on right now. If there are parents or teachers watching, they can get children to register for it, code for it. But the as a result of running the contest for the first 2 to 3 years, we started to receive feedback that children had fun trying to explore on their own and use the tutorials and build new things. And in due course, Google has come up with a program called CS First, which focuses on these various different activities to again introduce the concepts of computing, but in a very low entry barrier type of approach. And we do CS First workshops in schools, and again, there the teachers, once they see what is being presented, what is being talked about, and how it generates interest in students, then they come forward and they express an interest to run it in their schools or run it for a longer period of time, or see how they can incorporate these activities into, as Madhavan was saying, there are activity periods and slots in the timetable where you could do this. So I think the message for the community which is trying to bring more computer science into schools and into the population is that the more we can demonstrate how it generates interest and how it develops the mind of students and how it helps in future in career choices or in general in any professional situation, I think the more we can demonstrate that this is nice, it works, it generates interest, the students are excited, the more teachers would be able to spend time and try to incorporate it into their teaching. We can build on that.
I hope that motivates the teachers who are watching this to join our upskilling session. So, yeah, I'll ask you a common question, and I feel that's the most relevant in this situation. The COVID-19 situation has demonstrated the pressing need for a digital transformation of most sectors. The education sector is not an exception. So, Kevin, do you think there would be permanent changes in the pedagogy after the pandemic ends?
Yeah, like so. Before we're gonna do that, I'd like to answer I like to disagree with Madhavan a little bit on teachers and STEM teacher shortage. I think it's very hard for someone who's 22 to make that decision, and choose a career where they know every single year the financial rewards will be different, even though perhaps in other aspects that they are different kinds of rewards, right? Whether it's social capital or elsewhere. If you look in the Bay Area, housing prices are very high, and it's very hard for teachers to be able to afford to buy a home long term. The differential in pay is double or triple sometimes, if not more. And we have to be creative in figuring out how we can incentivize teachers to teach computer science, whether it's in the UK they give new computer science teacher bonuses, or in New York they have Math for America. So if you're an experienced teacher, they like to keep you in the school system. Are there ways for industry to pitch in to help the teachers? In the US, American law firms would take their most promising young lawyers and let them clerk for a judge, even though the pay is much lower, but the firm says, you go to have that experience. We think that's incredibly important to contribute to law as a whole. And when you come back, we've saved your seniority. And in fact, when you're clerking for a judge, there are paid differential. Some of the firms will make up for it later, right? So how do you bring, engineers and education closer together? And I think we can see from other industry there are some creative ways to do that. And in order, I think, for for us to do CS education, we need to think of those solutions, whether on the policy side of building pathways, investing in teachers, not just in the training of teachers, but how do you retain or attract people to teaching and then retaining them. I think that's a problem that I think countries around the world all have, especially in STEM, because both education and industry compete for that same talent. And in terms of how it will change computer science education in general, I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And Teals has been teaching students in rural areas remotely since 2012. So we've been doing it for students in rural America for a while, and we realized that students today are actually, how they interact with friends, how they interact with the world online. It's different than when we grew up, where that's almost like two separate spheres. To them, it's one thing. So it's not, for the students themselves, it's not as big of a leap than I suspect the teachers will. How do we help the teachers, adapt to a hybrid model, and also school policies have to figure out what's the new normal, how do we adapt to the new normal, however schools reopen in the fall. So I think I don't think there's a set answer. I think every different school and school district will have their own answers, but I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see. When I did research in this sort of online education, I think this is the biggest experiment that we could have ever hoped for people who did that kind of research, and lots of different solutions out there. And I think eventually we'll find, depending on what the new normal is and what that interaction is, I think it will be really interesting to find out what kind of hybrid model we will have. A lot of schools are thinking about, flipped classrooms, and, you come to school, what's the most valuable interaction you have with a teacher? It's the lab session for computer science, right? We'll record the lectures, you watch the lectures at home, and then you come to school and that's the lab section, right? Before it was like, oh man, we might want to try this. Now we may have to do this because there are no other options. They may be forced to do it. So I think all of these things that people have been trying out for the last decade in education might become a reality in the near future.
Mr. Madhavan, do you want to add anything to what Kevin said?
Yeah, I think that certainly it's going to change the way I think everybody approaches teaching. So one thing I think that as a person, I have been doing MOOCs and online teaching for 5-6 years now. And I think it's very clear that when you teach something online, you have to do a much better job of preparing and organizing your material, because you have no opportunity to, in some sense, adapt as you go along and to correct your mistakes and so on. So it is actually much harder to teach or to prepare your material online. And the satisfaction, of course, is that once you have done it, hopefully, but there's also a danger of not changing it. So there are pluses and minuses, but I think a lot of teachers are finding out that this idea of having to systematize and write down what they're actually teaching on a regular basis and prepare it in a coherent way, I think is hard, but I think students will begin to expect that. So I think that I do hope that it will make teaching a little bit more, in some sense, I don't want to say standardized, but at least it will make it more systematic. But I think that there are also huge challenges with if you don't have interaction in terms of evaluation and other, things that you need to understand the subject. So hopefully a hybrid model will emerge from all this, in which more people will be willing to accept the technology that you need to make the classroom more effective and more efficient. And as Kevin said, this is an unprecedented experiment which has been imposed on us. And so a lot of thinking has emerged from different experiences, and a lot of shortcomings have also been pointed out in different approaches that people have tried. So hopefully from this, we will learn better what to do and how to do it.
I'd say, though, that we have to be very, very careful that this situation is actually going to amplify the inequalities in society. And one is people not having access to technology or not having adequate access to technology. Even in the top institutions in India, making a full semester online has had its own challenges, and it has not been a smooth exercise. The second is that a lot of the school systems in India actually are methods of social support. Things like the midday meal scheme, having a primary school in every village or every few villages in remote areas, those are important places for children to get together so that also the parents are able to work and their children are guaranteed a meal. So there are sections of the society which will actually be disadvantaged from things moving online, even if it is a hybrid model. And so that's a huge challenge for the thinkers and policymakers in these circles to try to find what is the right balance. And this will be an emerging and a long-term theme. I don't expect that there will be quick answers. But maybe right now what we are doing is being reactive to the situation, and we will find more sustainable approaches for the future.
Yeah, that sounds like a the amplification of the digital divide between the haves and the have-nots are getting amplified, I think, the world over. Hardware, internet access. I think that's all going to be a part of it, and I think that's something that we didn't see before between the home and school, because a lot of places the schools will have it, but not so much at home. Now the home is school. That just gets a lot harder. But on a bright note, what Madhavan said about professors, I think a lot of professors realize, what do kids watch a lot? Oh, videos on YouTube. What are some techniques that YouTubers, because they do this for a living, right? Is engagement. How do they keep viewers and audience engaged? So, some more enterprising professors I've seen have been watching YouTubers on how to get audience engagement. How do you engage them for 10 minutes, right? So they've gotten very nice cameras with a ring light, lighting, I think, so how can you up that engagement? Because MOOCs, for general learning, their pass rate is depends on the MOOC, somewhere between 10 to 20%. But in K to 12, you can't have, in the elementary school or high school class, you can't have 20% of your kids passing, right? Like it needs to be substantially higher. So how do you combine those two? And we've seen some really creative solutions coming up, but how do we scale that up? Right? How do we do that? So I think it is going to be a very large experiment and figuring that out.
Mr. Madhavan, what are the long-standing changes in the pedagogy?
Sorry, I didn't catch that question. Can you see that again, please?
What are the permanent changes that would happen in the teaching methodologies because of this? Will there be any, as of now, institutions are struggling to shift online. So,
no, I think that what will change, I think Ashwini's points are very valid in a country like India. I think there is already been a realization that access from the student side is something. So the delivery cannot be completely online and left at that, because that doesn't reach a large fraction of students. And there are other social issues involved. But I think from the content preparation side, I think that now, maybe related to what Kevin is saying also, students are also watching more things online. They have better expectations. They know that there are people who explain things better than the person standing in front of them. So I think there's a lot more pressure on teachers to be more up to date. You can't just keep repeating material which you have been doing for the last 5 years without updating it. So I think a lot of these things will be positive in the sense that people will be forced to take a fresh look at how they arrange their material, look for better ways of presenting it. So I hope that pedagogy will improve as a result of this, mainly because the comparisons and the competitiveness with other people will improve. But I think everybody has, I mean, the reason that there is no one universal, I mean, MIT has had online lectures, for example, at undergrad level for many years online. There are MOOCs all over the place, but it's not that everybody is only following one particular course, because I think everybody has a different style of explaining and students have different ways of understanding. So I think there will always be room for different ways of presenting the material, but the kind of static take it or leave it kind of approach, I think, is not going to survive in this. And I hope that that will be for the better.
Like the way businesses changed, we saw through the 90s and the last or the first decade of this century that businesses were still thinking, okay, if you're a fashion house, well, maybe not having an online presence. I think now for the second decade of this century, it was quite clear that you need to have an online presence. It became a compulsory thing. I think that the only thing we can say probably at this moment with certainty is that a component of online for teaching and learning is going to become an essential part. And the form and shape that it takes is going to evolve as we go along, but it cannot be ignored. It is here to stay. This is the one thing that has been confirmed by the pandemic.
Thank you for that, sir. Owing to the time constraints, we would like to conclude soon. So before wrapping it up, we would love to hear a message from your side for our initiative UpSkill. Just a short message from each of you.
So who goes first? Okay, so I can say something.
Yes.
So I think that, I think Kevin has already mentioned it and we have already discussed it, but I think that really the most critical component in any of any initiative to improve or spread computational thinking or computing in schools is teacher training. I think that without that, it's a non-starter. We cannot just rely on people to learn it on their own. Students certainly need guidance. So I think that UpSkill or other initiatives which aim at doing this, I think are a critical part of the whole process. And so in that sense, I think this is a perfectly placed initiative. Now, of course, how one achieves it is a big challenge and one has to work and try different things. And also with this current challenge of not being able to interact face to face, whether one does it online, all these things have to be worked out. But I think that certainly is the right thing to be doing. And the more people who get into it, so CS Pathshala is doing it in some sense in there. In that sphere, but I think the more people who do this and contribute, I think the faster we can get to a place where we can do this more effectively across schools.
Mr. Ashwini?
I'd like to add that working with small concepts, trying to demonstrate success in small little ways and earning the trust of the community of teachers that you work with is very important. And so concentrate on building that trust, building that credibility, and introducing things in small pieces and showing why it matters. And then you can build a greater program around that. It's not an easy job. It takes a lot of time. And adding new things is not a trivial matter for teachers in India, so probably not for anywhere. And so earning that trust is a very important thing.
Thank you for that, sir. Kevin?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank IIT Madras and the Shaastra program, as well as my fellow panelists for this really amazing conversation and exchange of ideas 12 time zones away. And it's really great to see, I think CS departments, in a lot of countries getting engaged on this. And, it takes, I would say, CS departments out of our comfort zones, both as computer scientists as well as software engineers, and how do we build that bridge to education, right? Ultimately, we still need to figure out, what we're teaching, how we're going to teach it, and who's going to teach it. And CS departments can't do it on their own. So how do we build a bridge to education and come up with a solution that's scalable and sustainable and successful and accessible to all of our students and all of the things that we talked about, and actually get it in front of the students, right? And so it's not something that's solvable in a couple months, or you can build a platform and just like that'll be solved. It's not an app, right? It's not an app. So how do you build something that takes both people and infrastructure and platform and computer science and make it successful so that, the next generation of students will have access to all of these education and skill we talked about that will make a big impact on everyone's lives. And so how do we do that? And it's going to take a lot of work and bridge building and take us out of our comfort zones, but it's necessary and important and impactful work that needs to be done by all of us.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for all those insights. Now we officially reach the end of the panel discussion. We thank all the speakers for taking off their time besides their busy schedules. A special thanks to Mr. Kevin. He joined this panel discussion despite being 5:30 a.m. in the morning. We also thank all the viewers for joining us today. So I would like to end this panel discussion with a quote by Mark Zuckerberg. In 15 years, we would be teaching programming just like reading and writing and wondering why we didn't do it sooner. Shaastra UpSkill is an initiative to make this a reality, a tiny push for a paradigm shift in the way CS is taught in schools. Stay tuned for our future activity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chetan. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.